next up, we have Brandon Bayer from Blitz. I think, Brandon, if you just hop onto backstage and wait for Jen to beam you up. Oh, you're beamed up. Okay, you're on the Enterprise. Hello.
How are you?
Good, man. How are you?
Great. Good to be here.
Glad to have you over here. And it's really cool that we have so many different people from the what's now being called the FS Jam community, just growing. I really like that label. Is FS Jam like full stack jam? How do you like it?
Yeah, I think it's cool.
Tell me more about Blitz. So tell us more about Blitz and tell us how you built it. Tell us how the open source community is structured. Tell us more. Tell us more. We're hungry for more because we just saw
Okay.
Redwood and we want to know a lot more about Blitz.
So I go into quite a bit about Blitz in my presentation.
Okay,
Should
sounds
I go
good.
ahead and go with that, or?
Yeah, man, for sure. Okay, so I'm gonna hop off and let me know if I'll be watching this and you can. I'm just a shout out away.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, everyone. So excited to talk to you about Blitz today. Um, so the first thing, I'll give you a bit of background about me because I'm a boot camp grad myself, and I had an interesting journey so far. So I actually went to college for electrical engineering, and I got a 4-year degree there. But in the process of studying for electrical engineering, I took some software classes, and I was like, holy cow, this is amazing. And so I got a job right out of college doing software engineering, but it was embedded C. So I was programming with the C language, programming embedded microcontrollers. And they, it was all right, but I got kind of bored because it was nothing visual, right? It was just programming a chip that would control motors and things. And so I switched jobs and moved a bit higher up the stack, and I was working more with embedded Linux and C and C++. But still, like, was kind of bored. And finally, I attended an online boot camp. So I went to block.io, and it was like an online full stack apprenticeship. And they taught me about Ruby on Rails. And this gave me like all the foundational knowledge I needed for web programming, which is what I was wanting to get into. So I learned about HTML, JS, and Ruby on Rails, and HTTP request and how all of that works. And so that gave me like, yeah, excellent foundation that and then I could go on and then everything else I've pretty much taught myself once I had that kind of foundational knowledge. And then since then, I've spent about 3 years consulting and freelancing on my own. And this has probably been one of the most enjoyable part of my career so far. And I think a part of it is like I like variety. And so when you're at just a normal job, a lot of times you're doing sort of the same thing forever. And I wanted a lot more variety because I wasn't growing very much doing the same thing over and over and over. And so this was really good as I could work with different clients and different projects, and I gained a lot of experience doing that. So that's one thing that you might consider as you're like maybe looking for a job or looking for a next job is uh, how much are you growing? How much experience are you getting at your job? How much variety do you want? So one good way to start out, I think, is to work at an agency. And so doing that is similar to consulting on your own freelancing, but someone else is taking care of the business stuff for you. They are getting the clients and doing all of that stuff, but then you get to work on new projects and you get a lot of experience, different technologies, etc. And then at some point, if you want, you can go independent and do freelancing, which I think is amazing because I love being my own boss and just working from anywhere and just managing my own schedule. So that's a little about me. So let's go on and talk about the birth of Blitz. So I mentioned Ruby on Rails, and so many of us have wanted something like Ruby on Rails for the JavaScript ecosystem for a long time. So to give you a bit of background on Ruby on Rails, because I think most of you probably don't know much about it. Ruby on Rails started probably 20 years ago, and it's Ruby the language Ruby, and it's entirely server-side rendered. So there's very little JavaScript in most Ruby on Rails applications. Most of the time, it's just little sprinkles of JavaScript to do like autocomplete or something on the client. But most of it is server-side rendered in HTML templates on the server, and so it's very simple. Everything is all in one app. There's no API or data fetching from the client. There's no client-side state management, and it comes with a lot of things out of the box. A lot of the stuff you would need for every app, and so it's pretty productive. And so there's been a few things like this along the way for JavaScript, like Meteor, a few others that I'm missing right now, but most of those were server-side rendered too. But what I wanted was something that I could use React and would have the experience of Ruby on Rails. And so a lot of people have talked about like what would a Ruby on Rails looks like, and most of us didn't really know what it would look like, but we wanted something like it. And then the second thing was I was just really frustrated, and others too, that building a full stack JavaScript application is just too hard. There's too many things to learn because like you have to, especially because of the entire API layer, you have to learn either REST or GraphQL and everything that comes with that, and client-side state management and caching server data. And it's hard, frankly. And so I wanted something that was easier than that. So that brings us to February, this past February. And one day I had a phone call with a friend of mine who was a Ruby on Rails developer. And we were sparring back and forth about the trade-offs between developing with Ruby on Rails versus JavaScript and React. And of course, I love React. I love building user interfaces with React. It's so much easier than the Rails way, in my opinion. And you can do things so much more powerful. But after that call, I was really vexed by the relative simplicity of Ruby on Rails because there's no API layer. It's just all one thing. You don't have to manage different types of deployments like a backend and a front end. And I got to thinking, and I was like, you know what? I think today we have all the pieces that we need to create a Ruby on Rails for JavaScript. And so I threw together a little prototype using Next.js, and I put out a tweet that said, hey, I'm building the Ruby on Rails for JavaScript. Here's a quick little demo video, but there's nothing on GitHub. There's nothing you can use yet, but it's going to be amazing, and I need your help to build it. And this tweet sort of went viral, and a lot of people got really excited about it. And I got a bunch of people that were interested in helping build Blitz. And so we set off, and here we are 6 months later, and we've come up with something pretty awesome that I want to show you today. So to start with, we'll give you an overview of what Blitz is. First is built on Next.js and Prisma, and I'll talk about what both of those are in case you don't know. So Next.js is a framework for React. So React is like very tightly scoped. It only manages the rendering part. So if you just use plain React, you still have to set up your own like Webpack config or whatever, and there's still like so much you have to do to actually build an application. But Next is awesome because it's a framework for React that gives you all the things you need to, all the basics that you need to build a React app. So with Next, you don't have to configure Webpack. It does that for you. It gives you the ability to have server-side rendering, client-side rendering, and statically generated pages all in the same app on a page-by-page basis. So it's super powerful. It's like a Swiss Army knife. And I would highly recommend it for any React app or React website for that matter too. It doesn't have to be an app. So that's Next. And so yeah, so now we have Blitz that comes along, and Blitz is built on top of Next. So Blitz is a framework on top of a framework on top of React. So it's kind of crazy, but with each level, it gets progressively easier and better. All right, so secondly, Prisma 2 comes in by default with the Blitz app, and Prisma 2 is a database client. That's basically what it is. It makes it really nice to connect to a database and read and write data from that database. So as I mentioned, it's basically a full-on replacement of Ruby on Rails. We don't have all the features that Ruby on Rails has yet, but we're working towards that. And then lastly, the biggest thing about Blitz is that it has a zero API data layer. And so this is the single biggest thing that makes Blitz unique and amazing. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. So I'm going to list the foundational principles of Blitz. I'm not going to go into all of them in detail, but I want to list them here just so that you see them. Number 1 is full stack and monolithic. Number 2, API not required. Number 3, convention over configuration. Number 4, loose opinions, so not strong opinions, loose opinions. Number 5, easy to start and easy to scale. Number 6, stability. And number 7, community over code. So we'll talk about what full stack and monolithic is. A monolithic means that there's one thing to build and one thing to deploy. So most React apps today require two things, a front end and a back end, and they're deployed separately, and they're two separate things that you have to develop, and then you have to connect them together with an API layer. So that's not monolithic. But what is a monolith is where everything, your front end, back end, all your code is together in one single app, and then there's only one thing to deploy. So a monolith is much, much faster and easier to develop than the alternative because there's less moving parts, less complexity, less types of errors you have to handle, etc. So one thing you may hear people talk about is that monoliths don't scale. Ruby on Rails does have scaling issues, but the modern monolith scales much better. So for example, you can deploy Blitz serverless, and so all your server functions are serverless functions that can scale infinitely. And so the modern monolith is structured much better and yeah. So if somebody complains about that, just like ignore them. All right, so API not required. So like I said before, this is the single biggest thing about Blitz to know. It's what makes it unique. It's what makes it awesome. So until now, an API has always been required to connect your backend to your front end, but Blitz does away with that. And like I mentioned, it adds complexity, it slows you down. And so when you get rid of that, it speeds you up tremendously. So there's no REST or GraphQL in a Blitz app. So you don't have to know anything about that. You don't even have to know how to use fetch or HTTP because that's all abstracted away. Now, if you need, you can get to that. You can access that layer, but you don't have to by default. So how we do this is we abstract the API layer into a compile step. So there actually is an API layer inside a Blitz app that is there when it actually runs. But as a developer, you don't have to think about it or worry about it or build it or maintain it or nothing. So what this means is you can import server code directly into your front end. Like this is kind of mind-blowing, but you basically, like normally if you try to do this, you'll get some type of compile error or something goofy. But in Blitz, that's how it works. You just write your server code, your front-end code, import it and use it just like it's all in the same thing. But then at compile time, that function import is swapped out with an API call. And I'll show you an example of how that works too. So in a Blitz app, all your server code will mostly live in Blitz queries and mutations. Now, these are not GraphQL. It's just using the same naming conventions as GraphQL. Queries are reading data, and then mutations are modifying data, so create, update, delete. And queries and mutations are plain asynchronous JavaScript functions that always run on the server. So there's no like special classes or anything. It's just a plain function that takes some input and returns that. And then of course you can add an API if you need in a Blitz app, like you can add GraphQL or something. But the point is that you don't have to by default. But Blitz doesn't restrict you from anything that you've always done if you want to do something or if you need to do something. Okay, so here's a architecture diagram that sort of describes what's going on in a Blitz app. So along the top, we have a client-side code, and then on the bottom is server code. So let's look at the left side here. We have this purple box represents a server-side rendered page. And you can see that this has code that runs on the server and on the client because it's server rendered. So each request is going to hit the server, and then it's going to make a direct function call. It's going to use the get listing query to load that data on the server, generate the HTML on the server. The HTML goes down to the client, and then on the client, JavaScript will pick up and run any necessary JavaScript code on the client. So that's pretty straightforward. And then on the right side is a client-side rendered page. So the purple box, you can see that there's only code that runs on the client. And then you can see these dashed lines represent a direct function import where it's importing a get listing query and an update listing mutation. And then at build time, this gray box is appeared where it's an auto-generated JSON API where every query and mutation is generated as a unique API endpoint. So the API is there, but you don't have to think about it. It's abstracted away for you. So you can see here that we have this get listing query, and it's reused for the server-side page and the client-side render page, but you have two different types of pages. And so it's really flexible. All right, let's look at some code. What you're looking at now is a get listing query. So we'll go through it line by line. The first line is we're importing the database client from our database folder, and this is an instance of Prisma 2. Then we have some TypeScript types, which you can ignore if you don't know TypeScript. And then we export default async function get listing, and it takes some input, and inside that it accesses the database, gets a listing item from the database, and returns that. So this is a production version will have a bit more stuff in here like authorization, but this is like the essence of what a query is that runs on the server. So it's very, very simple. This is a place where you would run any additional business logic, like I already mentioned, authorization. You could also fetch third-party APIs. For example, there are APIs that you can't call from the client. You have to call them from the server. So you could do that here. Yeah, so now we're going to go look at the component where this is used. So we take this file, this get listing function that's exported from here, and we're going to import it over here into our React component. So the second line up here is import get listing, and that's the direct path to that file we were just looking at. And then you can see we import use query, use param, and link from Blitz. Next, we define the listing component. So this is a normal React component, nothing else special really going on here. So the first thing inside the component is that we get the listing ID from the router. So use param is a hook that will get is a route parameter. So this is a dynamic route parameter because the listing, so it's like /listing/ID. And then, so it's going to get the ID from the router, and then we're going to use that to get the listing for this route. So the second line is we use the use query hook, and we pass the get listing query into that hook, and then we pass in the arguments. So here, what this line is doing is getting the listing from the database where the ID is equal to the ID of this route. Away. Oops. Sorry about that. Okay. So, and then so we get that listing and then we return it here. And so this is it. Those two files that we just looked at, the query and this component, that's all you have to do to read, to do things on the server and access that data on the client. There's no REST, no GraphQL, no fetching, no Redux, no nothing. Like, it's so simple and amazing. It's still like, even when I do it, it's like, wow, like it seems like I should be doing more stuff, but it's so easy. Okay, so let's talk about one more foundational principle, which is convention over configuration. This is something that you'll probably hear if you haven't already, just people talking about. And I think this was mainly popularized by Ruby on Rails. Basically, it means that things just work by default without configuring them. So as concrete examples, React itself is basically configuration over convention. So you can't really do anything without configuring it, i.e. like you have to set up Webpack yourself and all of that sort of stuff. But then Next.js is a bit like the opposite. Next is more convention over configuration. So if you create a new Next.js app, it'll work without configuring anything. And then Blitz takes that like a whole nother huge step beyond what Next does, and it sets up a lot of things for you. So it gives you a lot of like default decisions. So these are type of decisions like how to structure files, how to set up ESLint, how to set up Jest, how to set up Prettier. We like make default decisions for you so that if you don't care, then you don't care and you don't have to think about it. But if you do care, then you're welcome, and it's easy to change the defaults and use something else. But by default, it just works. So the biggest thing you'll see this, where you'll see this in a Blitz app, is new apps. So what you get with the new app is really quite awesome. You get ESLint set up and configured by default. You get Prettier set up and configured by default. You have Jest set up by default for testing. You have like a router mock set up for your test by default. So like everything that you're going to need, we try to put in there. Now the big one is authentication is set up in new apps by default. So when you generate a new app, you already have user sign up, log in, log out, like already done. So you don't have to do that. It's I think it's my favorite feature about Blitz so far, because it's so annoying to set up auth in your own app, but with Blitz, like you don't have to. It's already done for you. So just briefly, I'll mention that Blitz is database agnostic. So it comes with Prisma 2 by default, but you can use any database client or layer. You could use Fauna instead of Prisma. You could use DynamoDB or like whatever you want. You could use Firebase for that matter too. So another thing is like code organization is, like I mentioned, you have a default file structure. Like you can change that, but we give you a default convention. Okay, so the last foundational principle that I will talk about is community over code. And this basically follows on from the previous talk, talking about open source contributions, which was a great talk, that people are far more important than anything else. And like people are more important than like some type of code quality or like correctness or something. Like there shouldn't be bugs, but beyond that, like it's just people are more important. So we treat every person with dignity and worth. This is super important in any open source project. And it really, this is like super important in all of life, especially right now with all of our differences and everything going on in the world. We need to treat every person with dignity and worth, regardless of what their beliefs are. And we're all in this together. So all of us want a framework that makes us productive, that's fun to use, that's enjoyable. And so that describes our community. We're all working together. We're all more similar than we are different, and we can and should solve problems together. So let's talk about how to get started with Blitz. And I'm afraid to say that there's only 2 steps. That's all you have to do. first thing is install the Blitz CLI globally. So you run npm I or install -g for global and then Blitz, and that will install Blitz globally on your computer. Or if you like Yarn, then you can do yarn global add Blitz. And then secondly is run Blitz new my app, or pass in the name of whatever the name of your project is. And then that's all you have to do. That will set up a brand new app for you, complete with authentication, authorization, and then all the other things I talked about. Okay, so now I'm going to show you what a new app looks like, and we'll walk through some of the different parts of the code and talk about, like, yeah, just give you a demo. Okay, I think probably big enough to see. Let me know if not. So what we're looking at here is we have just ran Blitz new Mint Beans, the name of this app. So the first thing, it'll prompt you to pick a form library, and I picked React Final Form. And then here is a fairly long list of files that are created for you by default. So this can be a bit overwhelming, but there's nothing complicated here. So take your time, explore this. And so to give you an example, if you create a new Next.js project, basically all you have is one single file. And so by go away. So with Next, yeah, so it starts out, it looks super simple, it's like amazing, but then every time you need to do something else, to add like some type of configuration or something, you have to keep adding new files. You have to go look at the docs, figure out what the file name should be, what should be in the file by default. But with Blitz, we have taken all of those and you have everything you need by default. So a lot of these files you may or may not need. Probably most of them you will need at some point. And so when you do need it, it's there already by default, and then you can just override or customize. So so here's like a few configuration files: a default environment, ESLint, prettier. It's configured that you can go in and change. There's a few files that are set up for authentication. So there's a lot of authentication code that's inside Blitz, the framework, and then there's other authentication code that is in your app that we scaffold there. And that way you have full control over it, and that you can customize and override. So this is one big downside of using third-party services like Firebase, or even things like Hasura for GraphQL or something, is that you can't, they're super hard to customize. And almost every app, at some point, you're going to need to customize stuff. And so that's a huge feature of Blitz, is you can customize everything. You are in full control. So we have a use current user hook that allows you to use the logged in user on the client. And we have a get current user query that corresponds to that. We have a number of default pages. It's basically a 404 page that you can customize if you want. We have underscore app, which is your default, the root of your entire application. And then the document, which is where you define like the head and the body if you need. And then we have one really real page, which is the index page, like the home page, and then a test file for that. There's Babel config, Blitz config. There's a DB folder, which is where your database schema is. We'll look at that. Jest, package.json, test directory, and then a form component and label text field component that's set up based on which form you choose. Okay, so now that you have all the files, it automatically installs all your dependencies, runs prettier on your code, and then we're ready to go. Now, we need to follow these instructions. The first thing is go into the directory. Second thing is run blitzdb migrate. In the next release, migrate will be run for you automatically, but right now you still have to manually do it. And then we'll do this, and then after that, we'll run blitz start. Okay, and this uses SQLite by default, but then you can switch it to Postgres, which I recommend for production deployment. All right, so now run blitz start. and it'll boot this up, expose it at localhost 3000. Click on that. All right, so here is what you get, a brand new app, just a default page, gives you some helpful links, etc. And you can see there's two buttons here, sign up and login, and these work. So let's go ahead and sign up. Zoom up here. So just going to create an account. Okay, I'm logged in. User ID 1, user role of user. And project done, task of the day, set up authentication, done, and go home. So you can log out, log back in. And there you go. So it's amazing. All right, so now let's go ahead and follow what this says. So it says to add a new model to your app, run the following in your terminal. So we have this command called Blitz.generate that's pretty handy for generating code. So it'll generate, it can add stuff to your database schema, it can generate queries and mutations, and it can generate pages. So Blitz.generate all will generate all the possible things that we can generate. Otherwise, you can run Blitz.generate model or Blitz.generate pages or queries, etc. So we'll go ahead and just copy this example, go to our terminal, run that. All right, so the first thing is it added a project model to our schema. So everything you generate has, by default, it has an ID, a created that field, an updated that field, and then this has a name field that's a string because we passed in name : string. So you can add anything, any other attributes there. It's super easy. All right, and then it generates pages. So this generates 4 pages. And that's because there's 4 things to CRUD, C-R-U-D. So create, read, update, delete. So this has a projects index page, which is like the list to list all the projects. It has a projects new page to create a new project, a projects with a dynamic parameter here, project ID. So that's to view a single project. And then we have the same thing about /edit, which is to edit a single project. So you can change those. You don't have to follow that structure, but by default, this is like the recommended way to structure like where the actual create, read, update, delete would go. And then you have a form component, which right now is very basic. We need to improve that. You have both queries that you're going to need. So to get one project or get multiple projects. That's basically covers most of the cases that you will have. And then a mutation for create, update, and delete. So there you go, everything that you need. Now we need to follow what this says to run blitzdb migrate because we added something to our database scheme. So run that, give it a name, or just hit enter, and then start the server again. Currently, you have to restart the server after every time you run blitzdb migrate. Well, hopefully we'll get that fixed. Okay, let's go back to our page here. Reload. All right, so now the third thing is to go to /projects. All right, so you can see the default empty page here. So this is a list of projects. So let's go ahead and create a project, and this will take us to /projects/new. And again, like super basic, but if you click this button, success, we created a new project. And then this redirects to project/1. So this is the project with ID 1. You can view that. Now we'll go back to the list, and there it is. Do that one more time. Create, project 2, go back to the list. All right, so that is like all the basics are there for you. So let's go look at the code for this. Why do I have 2 things running here? I had an older server running. Okay. So we're going to open the project's index page. Okay, so this is similar to the code we looked at before. Here's the important thing. So we import get projects query, and we'll look at that in a bit. And then inside the projects list component, we have that use query hook, pass the query function in, and then in this case, we're getting all the projects ordered by the ID. And then we just map over the projects and list them out. Okay, so fairly simple. So let's go look at get projects query. And here's the query. So again, fairly simple. Half of this is TypeScript types, which is that section right there. And then we have the get projects function, takes some input, and then calls the database, gets the projects, and returns that. Now there's one new thing here, which wasn't in the code example, and this is context.session.authorize. If you make this call inside a query or mutation, it will ensure that you are logged in. If not, it will throw a authentication error. And by default, we handle that by showing a login screen. So we'll show how that works. So let's go back to the home page, click log out, and then click on projects again. And oops, authentication error, you must be logged in to access this. This error overlay, it's unfortunate that it's shown by default or shown in development. It shows up, which in this case, we're handling the error, but it says unhandled runtime error, but we handled it, which is basically a bug inside of Next.js. But it doesn't show up in production. So just ignore that. And then you can see we have a login form here. So let's log in. And then bam, we're back to our projects page, exactly where we wanted. So if we just call authorize without any arguments, it ensures that you're logged in, but the user can have any role. Now, let's say we should enforce that a user is an admin to be able to access this. So we can pass in a role. And now if we go back, you can see that, oops, 403, sorry, you're not authorized to access this. So there you go, in a new app, super easy, authentication and authorization. All right, let's look at the database schema file to give you an idea of this. So db/schema.prisma. What's this? Okay, so these first two things, user model and session model, comes in a new app by default. And then you can see the project model that was added here, the new code. So this is relatively straightforward. If you've never used a database before, you'll need to learn a few things about databases. The Prisma documentation is pretty good at this. And a lot of the schema is pretty self-explanatory. Like you can see like it's an int or a string. And then you can define relations. So for example, up here, a user model has sessions, which is an array of session models, and that links over to the session. And then inside the session, it has a user ID field and a user. And these together is what links the session to the user in your database. Okay, so it's a little bit to learn if you're not familiar with database, but it's not too hard either. I would say overall, it's probably easier than learning all of GraphQL. Okay. So one other thing that I will show you is we have a thing called recipes. So let's go to the Blitz.js documentation, read the docs, and we can search for recipe, and then we have a documentation page called using recipes. Now, Blitz recipes are one command that allows you to install any amount of code into your project. So this is commonly used for installing third-party libraries that require some type of integration. So like imagine, so like for example, here's Blitz install Tailwind CSS. So it's one command will install, it'll set up everything you need. So it'll add the post CSS config, it'll add imports where you need them, etc. So this, instead of going to the documentation for Tailwind and copying, pasting multiple commands and code snippets into your project, and then like missing something and there's a bug, you have to go fix it and try to figure out what's wrong. You just run blitz install recipe name, one thing, and it's already installed for you automatically. So this is one thing, another thing that I'm super excited about. But it's still new. We just released this not long ago, a couple weeks. So there's not very many recipes. You can see the list here. But we'll be adding these. Eventually, there will be hundreds. And if you want to help contribute recipes, that'd be great too. So we have Chakra, Emotion, Material UI, Render, which is a deployment platform, and Tailwind. So I'll show you how that works. But so if we go to the terminal here and run Blitz install Chakra, this is going to download the recipe and install any dependencies it needs. And it's going to have multiple different questions here. Right now, it asks you too many things. You have to hit enter too many times. So we're going to make that better. Okay, so the first thing, it installs all the dependencies required for Chakra. So there's 4 of them. So normally, without a recipe, you would have to go run npm install Chakra UI, emotion core, emotion style, emotion theming. But this is just doing it for you. Okay, hit enter again. All right, now it's adding the theme provider in your root of your application. Again, you would have to copy and paste that, but now you don't. All right, so Chakra is installed. So now let's go to the home page here. All right, so this logout button, see it's the default purple. This is styled here by just like a little bit of CSS in the Blitz, the default Blitz code. So let's change that to be Chakra. So we are going to open up Pages Index, and we are going to import button from Chakra UI core. And then down here, this is the login button. I'm going to change this to be capital B button, remove the class name, hit enter, and go back, and now it's a Chakra button. So it's, well, recipes are awesome, and they're going to get better because we'll just keep adding more of them. All right, so one thing I want to show you is if you're, that might be new to you, if you're not familiar with Next.js, is the file system-based routing. So here are all the files in the root of the Blitz app folder. So we have this app folder, which is where most of your code is. So we can do, here's all the files inside the app. So we have, again, like here's all the auth things. And then components, hooks, layouts, pages, projects. Okay, so the pages folder inside here is a special folder. And anything inside a pages folder is going to correspond to a route. So here, this pages folder has an index file, which means that this is going to be /root. So the home page, this is your home page, pages/index. And then pages/404 is going to be your, so /404 is going to be your 404 page. And if we go into auth, under the auth folder, there's a pages folder here. And so this is a login, pages. So /login is going to render this login.tsx file. Okay, so routing is pretty easy. You just name the file name, and then that's it. And then down here in projects, we have pages. Now this is a bit more complex because we have folders inside of pages. So this will add sections to the URL. So we have pages/projects folder, so that means /projects. And then inside of that is index. So that means that this is /projects. And that's the index.tsx file will render the list. And then /projects/new will render this file, and so on. So fairly straightforward. So let's look a bit at the auth code briefly. This is really cool. So we'll go into the sign up mutation. Okay, so this is the code that's generated by default for you. Again, this is exporting a default function. It's a sign up mutation. Takes an input. Now inside here, we have this thing called sign up input. It comes from app auth validations. And this uses Zod, Z-O-D, which is it's a validation library. So you may have used YUP, Y-U-P, or that's the main one. This is kind of fairly common, but Zod is like an alternative to YUP that works a lot better with TypeScript and is very nice. Which, by the way, I wanted to mention that right now Blitz apps are TypeScript by default. We're almost to have full JS support, but we're not quite there. That should be coming very soon. But you can generate a new app, and then any new code you write, you can write it with mostly JavaScript. So that's just one thing to know at the moment. Okay, so we use the schema to ensure that there's an email and password here, and it'll throw an error if it's not. And then we hash the password, create the user, and then log in the user with this session.create thing. Okay, so what I wanted to show you was this validation thing. So let's go look at it. All right, so this says that the input must be an object, and it must have an email, which is a string, and it's formatted as an email, right? So it needs to have an @ sign. And then the password must be a string with a minimum of 10, a length of 10 characters, and a maximum of 100. So we use this on the server as like an authentic or like a security thing, right? So we want to ensure that you cannot create a user without a password. So it ensures that the password meets these requirements. But then also you want to show this on the client, right? You don't want to have the user enter in the data in the form and then hit save and then get the error back and be like, oh, the password wasn't right. Like you want to show them before they hit the submit button, right? Which is like commonly done in React. But what's cool here is that you can define the validation schema once and use it on the server and in your client. So let's go to the sign up page. And here we import the same validation schema and we pass it to our form component as the schema. And then that will show you, right? So there, so it says password should be 10 characters. Okay, so that's one thing that's like, it's pretty cool that you wouldn't get a lot of times with anything else where you have a separate back end and separate front end. So I think this about wraps it up for what I have to show you. And we can go to, there was actually just one more slide, and then we can do Q&A. So how can you contribute to Blitz? So we need your help. It's open source. We don't have like millions of dollars of funding. So we're all just helping and working together. We have almost 100 contributors so far since we started in February, which is awesome. And we appreciate contributions of any kind, whether you're helping with the Blitz code itself, code for like example apps, improving the documentation. Definitely documentation can be improved, creating like tutorial videos or things like that, blog posts, etc. We appreciate anything. And then lastly, I don't expect much from those of you who are students, but donations and sponsorships are greatly appreciated for Blitz and helps me work more on Blitz and less on consulting. And so like maybe your company would be interested in sponsoring Blitz. You can put your logo on the Blitz website and repo, which is a good way to get in front of early adopters. Oh yeah, and then the link here, blitz.js.com/docs/contributing is our contributing guide. So it goes over like, here's how to get started, here's how to find what to work on, etc. And I'm happy to help you personally too. You can join our Slack at slack.blitz.js.com. There's a link on the website, and you can message me on Flybear in there, and I'm happy to help you get started if you need. And then a few things here. So blitz.js.com is our website for the docs, and it's the best place to get started. And then I'm Flybear on Twitter, and you can follow Blitz on Twitter, which is blitz_JS. And then yeah, I think we got some time for Q&A. So Monarch. Probably caught Monarch off guard. So I'm looking at the chat. If anyone has questions, just paste them in the chat. And okay, so I see a few questions here. I'm scrolling back. All right, so why Prisma instead of Next? I guess that's how you say that, connects. Because I don't have a good answer because I've never used Next connects. Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that. But I love Prisma because it works great with TypeScript, so it's fully typed. So even if you don't use TypeScript with JS, you get autocomplete. So you can do like db dot whatever. You have all your models right there. You can do whenever you're passing in arguments to like query for something, like that's typed, and then the result is typed. So that's probably one of the biggest benefits of Prisma. And then the Prisma team is really great. They're just making awesome stuff. Oh yeah, so the second thing is migrations. I'm not sure what Next has for migrations, if they have anything, but the Prisma schema and the migration system is really nice, and it's still like experimental state, so they're working on polishing it right now, but it's already awesome.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that was mine. Yeah, we're using Connects on the platform. We did Prisma, and previously there was we had Sequelize. I think Prisma is much more solid than Sequelize from the look of it. Sequelize is it's yeah, I guess it has its uses, but it didn't fit very well into our ecosystem. And then Prisma seems better than that. We just opted for Connects, which is a query builder. But for what Blitz is trying to do, I think Prisma is fantastic because you don't have to worry about learning how to actually write SQL. You don't have to worry about setting all that stuff up. Admittedly, we're working with some slightly advanced stuff. And if you just want to get a solid full stack application up and running, and you're about 95% of cases, I think Prisma is just perfect from the look of things. You said you had a few links to drop. So you said you have
I showed them on the slide, but I can paste them in. Shall I paste them in the Slack?
Yeah, for sure. I'll drop them in Discord. Are you in Discord?
I don't think so.
Okay, I need to add you on Discord. So you should totally drop them over there, and yeah, for sure over here as well.
Okay.
So, quick show of hands, whoever's listening, what do you guys think? How did you like this presentation? I saw a lot of people geeking out over here. Quick show of hands, I think that was a great presentation. Yes, I was caught off guard because I was listening to it, and then Brandon was like, "Oh, I'm done. Where's the backstage link?" Because Hopin doesn't let me just get on stage. I have to click a special link. So I lost where the door was. So Blitz.js, do you have...
I see one question here from Harsh. He said, is the communication to the server avoided in that CSR diagram then? No. So in that CSR diagram, there is the client side is making API requests to the server via that use query hook. So it's declarative. Blitz does it for you, but that use query hook is how you make an API call essentially to the backend. But like you just import the function and put it there, and like so you don't have to really think about it. Oh wow, that feels too easy. It gives me anxiety. Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, so since I haven't seen anyone talk about it yet, but the question that comes up all the time is like, oh, what about mobile apps? So because if you don't have a GraphQL API or something, like how can we do this? So you can reuse the generated API. It's there. You just have to authenticate to the API that we generate, but you can use that from a mobile app. So you can do that via cookie authentication, just like we are now, or you can add token authentication. We have middleware HTTP middleware that you can add in and add your authentication stuff. You can add. We actually have an adapter for Connect middleware. So this is like Express style middleware. You can just plug that into the Blitz. And then while we're talking about it, we have an adapter for Passport.js, which is Passport.js is a library for. They have lots of strategies for social login, like Facebook, Twitter, etc. We have an adapter for Passport, so you can drop that into your Blitz app, and it's like super easy to add a social login to Blitz. So it uses this built-in authentication, but then authenticates via Twitter or Facebook or whatever strategy you use. So that's something that's pretty cool. We need to make a recipe for that, so it's easy. But right now, it's just copy and paste from our docs.
Super cool. We're running slightly short on time, so I just want to make sure that people get what they need. What's the best way to get involved in the Blitz community? Are you looking for contributors?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me get the link here quickly. Yeah, and I covered that briefly in the presentation, and then here's the link to the, I just pasted in the stage, to the contributing guide. And so that kind of gives you a brief overview.
Amazing. Brendan, is there anything that I missed? Was there anything that you wanted to say in parting, or anything that we can do to get the word out there for Blitz? Or
yeah, just tell everyone you know the good news about Blitz. I appreciate everyone watching, and yeah, I'm happy to answer questions on Twitter or in our Blitz Slack or anything. Just reach out anytime. And
cool. And people can join Blitz Discord through the Blitz website.
Slack, not
Slack.
Discord.
Gotcha.
But yes, there's a link on the website.
Awesome. Brandon, it has been a pleasure. A lot of people over here have probably never seen an application like this, because JavaScript devs, they don't do Rails these days. And the stuff that you're showing is sci-fi for me too. Like, this is really cool stuff. So thank you so much for being a part of the Unconference today.
Thank you. You're welcome.
All right. Take care.
Bye.